And at some point, you are limited by the technology that you have. And that's where you start looking for different answers, start looking for paradigm shifts. We don't tell you what is the perfect order point, because that does not exist. We tell you that there are multiple order points. Mm-hmm. Some have some functions and some have other functions. You have to decide which way you want to go.
Welcome back to Lokad TV. I'm your host Conor, and as always, I'm joined by Lokad founder Joannes and Conor. Today, joining us in studio no less, is the head of stock and space management at Worten, Bruno Saraiva, and he's going to talk to us about retail stock allocation. Bruno, very good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Today is a historic day. In fact, it's my first interview with a guest in studio, so thank you for coming.
Thank you. Maybe you should choose a better one.
Well, I'll let you know at the end.
Okay. We'll see how it goes.
So what exactly do you get up to at Worten?
Yeah, well, as you said, I'm the responsible for the stock and the space in Worten. So what that does mean? Really, it means that we are responsible for the upstream and downstream of stock procurement and allocation. And there's some fancy words about it. But, well, we buy to the suppliers. We do the forecast with them in the best way that we can, and hopefully Lokad will help that in the future. Mm-hmm. And we are responsible for all the supply chain until it gets to the client's hands. So we buy, I don't say, a unit of stock from some supplier, like an iPod, and until it gets to the client's final hands, we are responsible for allocate it to the store, see if it's not out of stock, see if it's not on the surplus of stock, and also see if it's in the correct store that client will have it to purchase.
And this is like 4 or 5 stores?
No, it's like 300 stores in Iberia.
Well, that sounds like an enormous task.
Yeah,
I mean, that presumably brings an enormous set of problems, no?
Yeah. Also, but we're just talking about stock in the space.
Yeah, in terms of the allocation.
Yeah, in the space side of things. So, at the space side of things, we are also responsible to design all the layout from the stores. So everything from what categories should be in what square meters. Mm-hmm. Why is it turn out as it was, like the visual merchandising rules that you see it at a high level? Why is that brand there? Why is that price there and not at the end of the shelf? And also the solutions, the visual solutions that you have to see. Imagine if a hard disk space is 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes, why is it that and what that means for the client? So that's other of our responsibilities all over 300 stores as well.
300 stores. And how exactly do you decide what you allocate? Although this is getting to the actual problem. Why is that so difficult?
It's difficult because, well, we are an omnichannel company, as you guys know. And as an omnichannel company, everything needs to be everywhere disposable for the client. So if you go to, I would say, Porto, and you need an item that's not in store in Porto, you should be able to get it in a couple hours on an actual day to get it to that store in Porto. So that means that the stock must be somewhere in the chain available for that client. It must be in perfect conditions, available to buy, and also it must be something that the client is hopefully waiting for at the end of the day. So you cannot discard the compromise that you do with the client. So, and that happens every second for more than 10,000 products in all our stores, mm-hmm. and millions of products in all our suppliers.
And what methods have you tried in the past to address this issue? Because again, that sounds incredibly logistically challenging.
Yeah. Well, you can see it as a prehistoric point of view if you want. So you start with an Excel with some VLOOKUPs in some...
Joannes has thoughts about Excel.
Some files. And then you pass it through a database in Access. So you do something with forms a little bit faster. Mm-hmm. Then you go to something that is in SQL base and you try to build it faster and more aligns because, Access has a limit of 2 gigabytes of information. And at some point, you are limited by the technology that you have. And that's where you start looking for different answers, start looking for paradigm shifts. And, well, hopefully here in Lokad, we found it.
Well, actually, on that note, Joannes, forgive me. Joannes, perhaps you can see again the first one in studio, multiple names. Joannes, sorry. Perhaps you can expand on that, the technological difficulties of trying to solve the problems Bruno's describing using things like Excel.
And stepping back from that a little bit, I would say first, retail, despite seemingly relatively simple, I mean, after all, putting a product on display looks easier than manufacturing the product with all the sort of technologies that comes into the product. But in terms of economics, what makes an undertaking easier or more difficult is the amount of competition. And the specific interest, I mean, in my eyes, that has been a long-term interest with retailers is that it is incredibly competitive. And if you look at the sort of giants that dominated, retail, for example, in the 20th century, one of those giants, which was at some point, the largest retail chain of the world was, I think, E&P in the US. And nowadays, most people don't even know that this company exists. Walmart has entirely displaced them. So you see, it has been an ongoing battle. People think nowadays of the multi-channel changing the rule of the game and disrupting this industry. But in fact, it is an industry that has disrupted itself already. Even in the modern times, probably something like a dozen times already. And indeed, in terms of from a retail chain, the superior execution is what preserves your competitive edge, because there is very little things that prevents. I mean, in some countries, for some sort of retail, let's say pharmacy, you might have barriers of entry of regulatory nature and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But for mainstream retail, more often than not, there is very, very little of those barriers, and thus, if you're not really cutting edge with all your practices and techniques, well, you get your lunch eaten literally by some of the competitors. So that gives you, that forces you to be, I would say, to stay at the edge. Now, the interesting thing is that innovations can take many forms. One of the key ideas, for example, for Walmart to displace their former competitors was to move away from city centers, so that they could have bigger supermarkets, so that they could have, I would say, better economies of scale. So technologies and innovation comes in many forms. Not all of those forms are, I would say, take the form of I would say, software-related technologies. Mm-hmm. You can have plenty of other ones. Now, what is interesting is that, fortunately for Lokad, I would say, customers expect a diversity of products, a quality of service that seems to require the sort of benefits that the technology, the digital technologies brings. Because you see, if you economies of scales work very nicely as long as you have comparatively fewer products, that you can have a mass effect. You have this simplicity that you take advantage of, etc. But I would say over the last couple of decades, the markets have grown for plenty of reasons, very, very complex. And this complexity is not just accidental. It is also because it suits the customers better. It's in a way, you can see e-commerce, as just a way to take care of the last mile on behalf of the clients. Yes. And this brings value for the client, but then the entire burden in terms of complexity shifts to the retailer. And that's and now that's what we're having, is that retailers are not e-commerce or brick and mortar; they are both and other things. And so we have all those complexities that creeps in, and that makes those technologies more relevant than ever. So maybe so if we go back to this sort of Excel technologies, I would say, well, it depends on your comparative pressure. If you go back to 40 years ago, stores had maybe something like a tenth of the assortment. Maybe those sort of things were suitable, and comparatively they were better things to do with your money, your attention, and your intellectual bandwidth than chasing sophisticated algorithms to do those sort of things.
Yes.
Plus, also the amount of data that you have about your supply chain landscape has grown enormously. I mean, barcodes are more prevalent than ever. So you even have for products that are more expensive, you have RFIDs nowadays. So you have the amount of information that you have readily available about the state of your supply chain has grown tremendously, and thus the opportunity cost of associated with not using this data has grown also. So I see how that all of those things have emerged, and indeed, look at our perspective is to try to make the most of what we can do with both all this data being readily available and modern computing hardware being cheaper than ever when it comes to crunch this data for supply chain purposes.
Well, this sort of dovetails into the financially driven perspective, the overarching, financially driven perspective that Lokad has. And if I can turn to Bruno, you describe, again, with taking into consideration all the constraints that Joannes has just described, what led you to consider a purely financially driven perspective on all of these problems in an omnichannel retail space?
Yeah. So I would say that if you look for supply chain in a financial perspective way, there's a lot of gains to take from it. And people look at it from the past as something that, you need only to buy and your objective is to put it on stores. That's what you do. You buy it and you put it on store. It's like an administrative thing that you need to do in order to the commercial team start to give more report and more rappels upon the products that you intend to sell. But today it's not like that. Take the example for Walmart. Joannes was talking about. Walmart starts one of its big investments and how to put that money in use is by buying until the last day of the month, so they can take advantage of the pay terms that they have with their suppliers. So the inventory was crucial for them to have a very good free cash flow in order to invest in other things, typically in stores delocated from the city centers. That's the one I was talking about. That was a very good strategy. That was what allows them to be against Amazon, have an omnichannel response to that kind of last mile proposition that we all know about. So today, in stock inventory and in supply chains, it's very important that you are financially driven about it, because once you have all your ABCs, if the C's are many C's, that's costs a lot of money to a company. And that is something that today's company, with our reducing margins that they have, cannot abide to. They cannot abide to. So we are, in great terms, responsible in order to have all the items rotating, have coverage days so low. So in terms of comparative pay terms, they are freeing a lot of cash in order to invest in other things that you need to do, like last mile, like have all your prices aligned with the market or even below, so the client can see you as a destined low price everyday kind of store. All those kind of things, you need that money to invest in that. And one of the biggest ways to try to pull that money out from your company is guarantee that your inventory is always rotating until the last day, and all your pay terms are way above that, in order to generate a very great free cash flow. And one of the things that you can do that with such a large assortment, so we have millions and millions of products, you have to have very big quantitative analysis in order to say, well, these are not doing his rotation thing, so you need to discard this, or you need to put this in something that lowers their inventory levels, but always allowing clients to have it in the next day or in the next 2 days if they ever wanted to.
Oh, sorry, Joannes.
No,
I'll save my question.
I think one of the things that strikes me when it comes to those financial imperatives is that very frequently I think people misunderstand the intent. I think when it comes to this, you are financially driven. It resonates as if greed was the end to end. You're such a greedy businessman. Everything is about money, etc. But I think this is missing the point. The reality is that the financial perspective is an instrument to manage the complexity of the supply chain. You see, your vision as a whole is to deliver an excellent service that makes your clients on a large scale happy and loyal so that they come back. And yes, incidentally, you're getting rich in the product. But the idea of getting rich is not, this is something that is necessity, like putting fuel in a car. But this is not really about what drives people on a daily basis. So this financial imperative is as I was saying, it's the way I see it, that's really the way at Lokad, the way we approach the thing is that it's a way to manage the complexity. Because the reality is that, especially with the supply chain, which is an art of complexity management in a way, is that you have so many conflicting goals. You want the best price for your client, but you want the best service. You want to avoid waste because you want to be sustainable, but that conflict with the idea of having a good service, because if you have never any stockouts, then at the end you have unsold inventory. So you have tons of things that just conflict. All those goals are conflicting with one another. And also when you enter the realm of, I would say, the large corporation like Worten, there is nothing local about problems. You have one store that maybe needs an investment to have because they need some sort of renovation, and this money competes with things that are completely different, such as should we actually buy more trucks, or should we invest in a new piece of software? Those concerns are completely unrelated, but they're still connected in the sense that they all compete for the same sort of resources in the company. And so the financial perspective, the way I see that, is to be more truthful to your true core vision, your grand ambition. And yes, it looks like, on the surface, it looks like you're just a greedy businessman chasing euros. But the reality is that if you do not do that, it means that you get distracted by one of the of the topic, and then suddenly you're doing, I would say, a lesser job at your core focus, at your core mission. Sorry.
Well, Bruno, as a man with the skin in the game here, on that note, how is the quantitative analysis going? The implementation, with Lokad?
No, well, it's going really well. We have now we are in the phase that we are finally developing everything that it goes to place for all the logistics flows that we need to be on live. We are anxious to starting using it because also we are going to a revolutionary legacy system. So we are trying to put many pieces into place in terms of technology. And Lokad has been, well, one of the successful ones. I remember when you do the POC in the beginning with you guys, like in 1 month we have great results, some things that we never haven't seen before with that time length. And I say that with all the modesty because we are a very evolved company in terms of supply chain and in terms of stock inventory. So we already have many great achievements on that area. But what you need the field to do about all of those years, because you have like 10 or 12 years of knowledge and put your brains into it in order to get those results. And you get there and you see, well, I need to reinvent this. I need to do something because this cannot be where it ends, right? And then you start looking for many tools in the market, and you see all those traditional approaches like, if you want a perfect order point, all you need to do is this, and that. And that's like everything you do in the last 10 years. It's trying to find the Waldo, right? In what is the perfect order point? And that does not exist. And one of the things that I first, when I talked to Lokad, one of the things that they first taught me was like, we don't tell you what is the perfect order point because that does not exist. We tell you that there are multiple order points. Some have some functions and some have other functions. You have to decide which way you want to go. And as Joannes was saying, is that sometimes you need to go the ones that are more financially driven and optimized because, that's what you need to do. If you have 300 cables that are all 1/5 if you don't have one, the other one will do for the client. And other times you can't do that. Other times you have to go for what is really important for the client, what he needs to be there, despite of its costs. And I see that's the essence that I think that Lokad will bring to the table. it will tell you exactly what you need to do and need to have in each situation with a lot of complex quantitative algorithms.
Maths.
Yeah,
You know,
or
I'm basically a numer.
yes. But applying that to each situation and learning from that as you go, that is something that you really need to do, and put a financial driver on it to say, well, you have picked the maturity of this item. So if you go a far longer, you just have to have more inventory, more cost, and less financial driven about this. Or the margin of this article doesn't depend on that. So don't go that way. Don't do that thing on that location specifically. But on the other one, you have to do that. So that kind of personalized approach for each item in each store, that is something that it's game changing. So we are very, very enthusiastic to see it through.
Well, Joannes, I mean, this is obviously your métier. You have a full lecture on retail stock allocation. So could you fill in the technical maths or the recipe?
I mean, I think the techniques are not so important compared to the sort of underlying methodology. I mean, and the gist of it is that if you, the classic, I would say, what I call naive rationalism, the classic Cartesian approach would say, I'm going to state the problem clearly, and then based on this clear statement, I'm going to devise and engineer the solution, and then we will be able to drop the solution on the problem, and it is solved. And there are many, I would say, there are many endeavors in I would say, in terms of our civilization, where this sort of things works. If you want, let's say, to have a better transformer, to change the voltage of electricity, you can do that, in a lab. You have a very specific problem, which is how do I go from something that is, let's say, 5,000 volts to 230 volts with maximal efficiency and eventually maximal efficiency under a certain limit of budget and whatnot. So this is, I would say, a very well-defined problem, and this sort of Cartesian top-down approach works very, very well. But again, if we go back to a retail chain, it's a gigantic mess. It's a gigantic mess. There is nothing. I mean, the problem is that you don't know what you don't know, and there are so many things that can go wrong in all sorts of ways. It's the first, you can't even see the supply chain. What you see are the electronic records collected through some sort of haphazard applicative landscape where some parts are like 40 years old. The people who engineer those parts, they are retired or possibly dead. That's the sort of things that happen in a large company. So this approach of having this some sort of a top-down reasoning of Cartesian approach, it just works very, very poorly. And one of the reasons why I think Lokad, you were mentioning this, after 1 month we had already some results, is that we take it the other way, which is just engineer hastily something that is kind of possibly a good solution, but really I say that, just whatever, go with the flow, engineer whatever seems to work as quickly as you can. And then iterate, not based on some grand top-down understanding, but quite the contrary. Iterate based on your super anecdotal observations of what is dysfunctioning the most. So you see, you just, and that's the way we approach things. We throw a naive recipe at the problem, and then we let people who have experience tell us what are the most insane parts of the recommendation that end up generated by this recipe. And this let us prioritize our efforts into the stuff that needs, attention most urgently. And very frequently, those things have nothing to do with what you will see in the literature. I mean, it's very rare that the biggest problem where people come to us and say, well, I believe that the rate of decay of your algorithm that is attempting to learn the seasonal parameters is not quite right. This is absolutely not the sort of feedback that we get from our clients. The sort of feedback is much more mundane, is like, oh, these results are complete nonsense. It seems that you didn't understand that negative order values represent returns. it is not like the grand sophisticated problems like algorithms to tweak the learning rates or whatever. It is something that is much more mundane, like among orders, purchase orders, the negative values represent something that are not even orders at all, but returns, and that, by the way, that's something, this sort of shenanigans are all over the place. And then, and that's how I think we end up having, rapid results is through this intense prioritization of what is it that needs to be fixed. And then we realize that we just don't know. And that's why I say it's a methodological, is that it's not so much a technology as much as the acknowledgement that we don't know, and thus we should not, initiate the process by putting, I would say, an enormous set of complexity, like a grand supply chain engine, before we even had the chance to be challenged about what is it that we're even trying to solve.
This sounds like a cultural shift, as opposed to trying to find the precise value. It's more, as you said, accepting that we don't know, embracing uncertainty. And if I could just return to Bruno, it seems to me that a key element of any successful project, certainly one like this, which involves such a cutting edge or bleeding edge approach to things, requires updating the culture. And how have you and Worten handled that? Because again, this is not normal, I guess, by your own account.
Well, one thing that defines Worten, I'd say, is unrest about the culture, because we are a very unrest company. We are very execution savvy, so we like to go for the goal and be very focused on that. And we are very resilient because we have to be. We are an Iberian company, so we are at the tail of Europe. Europe is big.
Pretty big.
So we need to strive. We are like the underdog. We need to strive to make it international, because we don't grow up on a country that has like 50 billion clients. We grew up on a country that has like 10 million clients, and then with Iberia have like 4 million clients as well. But that is something that you get unrest for, because you need to grow, you need to get bigger. And when you're getting bigger, you're always challenging yourselves and your culture, because as we said before, we start thinking on the Excel, then we start thinking on the Access. Why are we doing this? Because we need to. And how you need to do that, it's what makes us very uneasy what things are going to do. So when you bring Lokad program to Worten, everybody was really excited about it. Afraid, of course, because it will change a lot of things, but also very excited about it, because it means that first, we have the investment to bring something new and different to the company. Second, that you are doing that to uphold and improve the conditions, how you manage things. So you stop doing files and you start making decisions and taking approaches that you didn't take before. And third, because people evolve with that. They stop being administrative, something that was like making an exchange, putting something on the shelf, to being managers and to start having that managing mentality to how I do this, why I'm doing this, and what financial I'm retrieving from this, and how my client is benefiting from it. So that unrest and uneasy way of seeing things is also something that is part of the culture. But saying this, of course, is very beautiful, but there are always people that will like, well, now we have to do another program, we have to learn it all about it again. And that's part of, I think, the culture shifting change. And but seeing that people embrace that with open arms and are willing to change and improve on that, it's making it a lot easier. So, for example, we are testing out a lot of categories with a lot of stock managers. And those people already grasped it, and it was saying things like Joannes was saying before, like this is returns and this is seasonal, so you cannot take into account this kind of data here, because otherwise you're going to prove that. So that kind of feedback is almost immediate, because people want to be proven right for what we are doing, and Lokad's going to challenge that. And so people are trying to challenge that new system that comes in place. And when they see that, in fact, that brings improvement and involvement from them, then they accept it. And that's something that really drives us about this.
Joannes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, no. I mean, I can certainly understand the fear factor, because you see, again, for most problems outside supply chains, most problems, you want to approach the problem with, I would say, a high dose of certainty. I mean, if we go for, let's say, retail, and you want to have a barcode printer, you want to be almost quasi-certain that this printer is perfectly reliable. You know, why would you settle for anything but a perfectly reliable printer to print those barcodes? And for most of, I would say, the things that are, of our modern civilization, this approach of, engineering something into perfectly reliable results works fine and great, actually. Yeah. So the fear aspect of Lokad, and that's where I would say what makes supply chain so different is that there is so much mess, so much complexity that this approach of you want to engineer the certainty of the outcome backfires. Yeah, that's so you want to control things that are to a large extent beyond your control. That's what makes supply chain different from, let's say, what happens within a factory. Within the factory, you have complete control of what is happening. If you look at supply chains, first you have trucks that are going to cross roads that might be closed. There might be, weather conditions that are not suitable for people that are going to drive through. And then in a store, what does that even mean to have like a perfectly managed inventory? Are you going to protect your inventory so much so that people can't even touch it? Because you see, whenever you put something on display and people can touch it, it means that you give the opportunity to clients to misplace the products. So when you do retail, you have to expose yourself to a degree of chaos, because otherwise that would mean that everything would be sealed away. And by the way, if you go back in the 19th century, that was the old way of doing retail. People could not. It's a relatively recent invention that people can touch the products that are on display. I mean, the old school way of doing retail would be everything would be locked away from the client, and you would have to go through a clerk to gain access to that. And yes, that's a way to minimize chaos, but at the expense of perception and appeal of the store. So the way I see that is that Lokad, where the fear factor is that, well, I mean, that's part of the Lokad recipe, is to give up on so many certainties. I mean, you have to give up on the idea of knowing what is it that you want to optimize. We say that we have to optimize those financial drivers, but the weirdest thing is that we don't even know those financial drivers at the very beginning. We kind of discover them with the client. Yeah. And also on the forecasting side, we have those probabilistic forecasts, which is a way to say, well, we acknowledge that our forecasts are kind of crap. So we are just going to give you a spread of possibilities. And then when people look at those probabilistic forecasts, they say, but if I understand what Lokad is saying right, you say that whatever happens, Lokad will never be proven wrong because there was always like a probability for this thing to happen, which is another way to look at it. And it is very disconcerting. And yes, I think that is an emerging culture that is not suitable for all problems. But it takes companies that are really, really willing to change themselves, because I mean, to many people, it looks like playing with the fire. I mean, literally, why would you settle for anything that is not like certain outcome? Well, the recipe is that if you settle only for certain outcomes, in supply chain, you get very, very crappy results. And because, you dismiss all this ambient chaos instead of kind of embracing it.
Well, actually, perfect segue, which I've ruined by acknowledging, but segue. Bruno, what advice would you give to other, maybe not your competitors, but other actors in the retail space who are struggling to embrace the kind of uncertainty that Joannes just described, and that you described as well?
Yeah. Well, yesterday I was talking about this. So we have in most companies, in the supply and in the stock inventory, in procurement, we have a very closed mind still, because we are still managing like it's the 80s and the 90s. We are still trying to find the wall, though. We are still trying to be like the lesser person in the room. And it cannot be like that for two main reasons. The first one is that, well, supply chains and inventory have a very crucial role in today's retail.
Of course.
It's very, very important. Not only for the last mile, but only for the simple fact that people are each more have very little patience to not find what they want. And that's what's driving e-commerce, because e-commerce is a centralized unit that centralizes less inventory for majority of people. So they send it from one place only. What is the reason that you go for a store or a brick and mortar? You go there because it's on your way home, it's easier for you, and you have to want that human touch in order to see if that is really the best item that you are hoping for. If you go to that store, you have all that, but you don't have the item there. Well, that's a big turn down. So that is a crucial role that you play in terms of the client satisfaction score, and in terms of really making the difference to have an open store and not only everything online. Okay, so that is a crucial role that supply chains and inventory and procurement take place on. The second reason is because, well, if we are only and mostly of all ourselves perceived as the lesser man in the room, we are never going to change, because no one ever will invest in something that is seen lesser of itself. So that's some kind of profile that you have to combat to. You have to put data on that. You have to be proven right, and you have to prove others that you are right. That's what's driven change. That's what's driven magnificence on the topic. And well, I said before, most of the great companies that will do something of itself in the past, they started to understand that inventory was key, as a key role for that. Walmart did it that, JD Sports did it that. Well, they always perceive that the way that inventory is managed, how it's presented to the client, how it's available or not to the client, and what other options the clients have in order to get to that inventory at low prices, that is the main role to keep bringing clients to the stores. And that, of course, giving them loyalty benefits and everything else on top of that. But mainly because clients know that they have a place where they can find what they want, and they can find it at a better price than the other competitors, and also that they have some benefits to go there and buy there. So this is something that, I mean, major roles in terms of supply chain, in terms of inventory and procurement in those big companies need to start having on their minds. They need to see that they have to be someone and something that speaks in the room, that makes change and difference and make improvements on the matter. And also start being more digital and technology driven, because many of those companies are very intuitive driven. They are like, my sensibility for this is that, and that doesn't bring things aboard.
Like gut instincts.
Like Joannes was saying, you have to embrace the complexity, you have to embrace the chaos, and for that, using data in order to give the best outcome possible, to give a good decision on that. And that is mindset. That is clearly a mindset that needs to be happening in this industry. Anything else, the other competitors find it out, because I'm not revealing all the secrets.
Yeah, yes. Keep them to yourself, in your
you
pocket.
see, playing the devil's advocate, since I've met with many of my own competitors, competitors of Lokad, and some of them were actually founded in the 70s. So those problems have been around for a long time. And this idea of the importance of the quality of service, I think, retailers have acknowledged, these sort of problems for a very, very long time. And but why is it that that indeed in many companies, management ceased for whatever reasons, seemingly to stop paying attention to things that, broadly speaking, falls under the umbrella of supply chain. And here, again, playing the devil advocate, I believe that the vendors, the people who are selling solutions here, have a part of the blame. You see, because the problem is that, yes, and that's a bit of a paradox. On one side, you think you know the problem, like improving the quality of service in the store, that seems like well-defined enough. But on the other hand, how are you even, understanding the problem? And let me illustrate that. If you rephrase this problem as let's improve the service levels, then is it really the same thing as quality of service? And I would argue not at all. The service level, it's a measurement that has where the only one thing in favor of service level is the ease of measurement. So it's something that is easy to measure. It is not something that is perceived as very relevant by customers. I mean, customers first there are substitutions. They don't necessarily come into the store thinking, I really need this barcode. They have like, they have preferences, and if they think something that is, the right price, the right capabilities or look and feel and whatnot, that will suit their need just as well. They don't really care about, the fact that this barcode is present or not. And then in retail, very frequently, people don't buy one thing. They buy, several things. So it's not necessarily the availability individually, but more like the package of the stuff, that whether it makes sense or not.
The combination. Yeah.
Because if you have to walk 5 stores to get 5 things that you could get all in one place, that's so much a hassle. So again, my point is that in the 70s, that was, those techniques were pioneered, and again, I think to a large extent they backfired. And when people see they say Excel is just so backward, I would say yes, but not necessarily so much. So because what you don't see is that companies that went out of their way to get rid of Excel, let's say Target Canada, went bankrupt.
Yeah.
So literally people, and that for this sort of reason, and even for example more recently in Europe, Lidl wasted €500 million on the process to get rid of Excel. So you see, the way I see that is that in this journey there was this ambition, but if the sort of solution that are proposed by the market keeps backfiring, then even if Excel looks crude, there might be some wisdom in it. And there are some wisdom in the sense that Worten still exists while Target Canada do not. Yeah. So you see, so some people just went the way of the dodo due to that. So and so that's the way I say playing the devil's advocate, because then I'm saying that, well, the people who for whatever reasons decided to not go along the path of competitors of Lokad, not embrace those sort of things, survive better than the one we do that did. So now I think that that's the way Lokad approach that, is that to try to embrace what makes Excel so attractive. And I think that one of the things that makes so attractive is that, and I go back to this sort of chaos, is that Excel is an excellent way to manage the chaos. People can tweak their things, and maybe they are not going to apply, the sort of optimal formulas as divided by and I would say a very highly recognized university professors, etc. They are maybe going to do something that is going to be looked as some sort of numerical duct tape, a hasty fix, just some sort. And but if it works, again, there is this saying that if it looks stupid and it works, then maybe it's not stupid. And that's so the sort of takeaway for me from Lokad was we need to have whatever sort of technologies are pushed, we need to make sure that what makes those companies, the one that went for those crude methods like Excel, that didn't went bankrupt like Target Canada, that we preserve, what the essence of what make it works and what make it ticks. And I think that it is not about replacing the sort of very local knowledge with some sort of top-down technology. It is more like, what if we had a technology that could let those people express their insight and knowledge in ways that are more aligned with the long-term interest and more scalable with regard to the long-term interest of the company. Which is a completely different take, as opposed to have a technology that presents itself as a replacement of this expertise. That's.
Well, I don't really have any other questions, but it is customary at Lokad to give the final word to the guests. So, Bruno, to draw to a close my historic interview with you.
Well, historic is a bit heavy. Thanks for that.
I've decided it is.
Yeah. No, I would think that, well, for us, it's plainly simple like this. We are very invested in people's capabilities. So we are always, I mean, some of the best tools that we have, they are born from people. So someone one day just tired to get the same thing all over again and start doing something different in order to manage something better. So that's one of our main core values. And people will always have that liberty. But one thing that cannot do today is have a massive amount of decisions, because they are a bigger assortment, very large assortment, very bigger stores, large of items. So they cannot manage that. So they need help to do that. And I think what Loka is doing for us is helping us to doing that kind of decisions. At the end of the day, that's all recommended. So you are doing recommendations on products and what we should purchase and why. And people have the liberty to look at that and still instigate it. Still saying, well, no, I'm challenging this because this, for me, it doesn't make sense. From a point of managing the category, this doesn't make sense. Or otherwise say, well, I will let this on because, well, I'm very aligned with this result. And what we are learning with you guys is that you're really listening to that. So, and you incorporating that on all the complexity, on the algorithms, all the things that you develop. They are very, very interesting. And that's bringing more confidence to the people. So when people start seeing the results changing and shifting to something that they would acknowledge it will be right, and that will really bring results, people start trusting more. And I think trust is the key word here. So we really need to trust each other as we do with the teams right now. They are speaking in one true voice. They are trusting each other to make it the best of it. And that is why I think it's a very winner formula. And we are very happy with it right now. So thank you guys for that. It's been a pleasure working with you so far. And I'm sure it will continue to be.
Well, I love flattery. I don't know about Joannes, but I can't get enough.
It's not flattery. It's not flattery if it's true.
Well, thank you very much for joining us in the studio, Bruno. A pleasure to have you.
For the invitation. Always a pleasure to be with you.
You're welcome back anytime, of course.
Thank you very much.
And Joannes, thank you as always for your time. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.